Good morning, everyone. We're waiting for one last board member to be seated, and then we'll begin.
It was great. Thanks.
Okay, we're all of us board members that are going to be present are here. So let's call the meeting to order. And Robin, can you take roll?
Chair Bauer,
Here.
Vice Chair Corey,
Here.
Board Member Bernstein,
Here.
Board Member Makinen, Board Member Shepherd,
Here.
Board Member Wimmer, 6 present.
Thank you, Robin. We'll move to oral communications. Anyone who wants to speak about anything other than the topic at hand is welcome to come up and speak. 3 minutes max. I'm not seeing any cards nor any takers. Let's move on to agenda changes, deletions, additions. I don't know of any.
Good morning. There are no changes.
Good morning. Thank you. Why don't we skip city official reports, put that at the end of our meeting because that's not relevant to our current topic today, our study session. We have lots of people here and we want to get to the discussion of the main topic of conversation. I'd like to welcome Vin Nguyen, who is our new board liaison. Vin, thank you for joining us. We'll miss Robin. Robin, this is your last meeting with us?
It is, and I have to say it's been a real pleasure for the past 2 years being the secretary to the HRB, and I will miss all of you, so
well, we'll miss you too. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to our action item. It's a public hearing about the project at 1310 Bryant Street, 1235, 1263 Emerson Street. It's a HRB review of the draft environmental EIR, which was prepared for Castellea. I guess, Amy, we have a staff report to start.
Yes, good morning. Amy French, Chief Planning Official. Today the focus is the environmental impact report for the project. I need to run over here and get the mouse. Excuse me. And then, yes, thank you. Oh, shoot. Security alert. Great. Hi. Okay. End of pause. Amy French still, starting my presentation. This is the second opportunity for the public in a public hearing setting to provide comments on the draft environmental impact report. Here is the outline for today. I'm going to provide a bit of campus history, talk about today's campus a bit, and the adjacent school property. We have a historical resource on site, the gun building. We have the adjacent Emerson Street. Two properties are within the project site. Another is not and separately owned. And then we have our next steps for the HRB and your purview. Then we have our consultant, Catherine Waugh of TUDEC, who will be presenting with her associate here on the environmental impact report itself, with the focus on the cultural resources chapter in particular. So just for fun, I have an old slide here from 1894 when Palo Alto's first school was already built. Back in 1892, there was a building at 319 Kingsley. It was the first girls' prep school in Palo Alto. That school closed in 1901, and the building itself was moved from 319 Kingsley, 3 doors down, to 1121 Bryant. The building is still there today. It's called Castellea Hall, and it became Harker's Elementary, and then it served for 3 years as Castellea School for girls. We moved to this site, which is the current campus of Castellea School. As you can see, 1910, there were about 4 buildings, a 3-story dormitory, a chapel, a science building, and a gymnasium. You can see here the recitation hall, which later, which still exists today as the administration building. And here was the dorm that was removed years later. Back in 1924, we have a Sanborn map, shows the buildings that were present. The campus expanded a bit. At that point, there were 230 students. We have another historical image showing the Burge Clark building, which is the chapel that came along in 1926. And that remains as of today. So these 2 buildings are the historic buildings on the site, the administration building and the chapel, called the gun building. Then there were some other fun things on this map showing some Castellea property off-site here with a couple of homes and a field, and then we had some tennis courts across Melville. Here's just a long history of use permits. The first use permit was issued in 1960, and that included a 90-student dormitory that exceeded the current today's height limit for sure. There was a variance for that. And there's a long string of changes to the campus through conditional use permit. Not to get into detail on this, but just to show you the use permit has been the method of modifying the campus over the years. Here's today's Castellea School. And you can see this was formerly Melville Street, formerly went through the campus. It was, the city council approved removal of that, abandonment of the easement, and Castellea extended the campus across there. So here's today's school property in showing the various buildings, et cetera. These are the Castellea-owned properties on Emerson Street. They are 2 separate parcels today. Castellea proposes to merge the existing campus parcel with these 2 parcels. And this is an adjacent, separately owned property. It is a historic resource as well. So this shows the historical resource, the chapel, designed by Burge Clark. And this is the administration building. This is an adjacent classroom building that was from the 1960s. Here's that 1960s building that's proposed to be demolished. Here it is as existing, and here it is as proposed with the removal of the building and replacement with a new building. This is the historic gun building. This is showing the Phase 4 academic building that's proposed. This is showing, and the applicant will be providing a few slides showing this, but there's a couple of options that they're looking at. Once they propose to remove this building and expose the gun building, the historic building, and they're showing potential treatments to that exposed facade. There are fences around the property. Again, this is a proposal showing the fence that would go in Phase 4 next to the existing admin building and between the new building that they propose and this admin building. So that you can see this fence is looking similar to the existing fence. This shows just a map showing the proposed space between, it's about 50 feet between the new proposed building and the chapel here, or sorry, the administration building, and where that fence would go that was in the earlier slide. The aesthetics, to put on that administration building, they're showing the cedar wood shingles. Again, the applicant says they have some slides on this. This shows the Emerson Street condition. The environmental document goes into, analyzes or reports out on the buildings on the campus, and they also note this adjacent historic resource here on the separate property. Here are the dates of these buildings: 1912 for this house, 1979 for this house, and 1917 for this house. So here's the picture of the historic resource at 1215. It's National Register eligible. This is what the applicant proposes, is to remove those two structures and replace with a park that would be a private park and with some access to the community. In any case, the consultant we have here today can answer questions about this, but basically Chapter 6 of the EAR says that the historic significance and integrity of 1215 Emerson, the resource, is not dependent on the adjacent nearby structure presence, and that the 1979 home that Castellet proposes to remove is outside of 1215 Emerson's period of significance. So I just pulled that out of the EAR to help out with the discussion. Here are the homes here, showing the 1979 home and the 1263 Emerson, the 1912 home. I have some slides showing the changes that took place with 1263 Emerson. 1263 Emerson, this is again pulled out of the EIR that talks about the architectural merit of 1263, being because the building's been significantly modified. So those are some notes there. Again, I have some slides because I did research through the building permits. In 1973, there was a detached garage that oriented to Melville. Then the parcel map came through. The lots used to be here, 2 lots oriented to Melville, underlying lots. In 1977, they proposed to reorient the lots. So the lots were then reoriented towards Emerson Street. Then in 1979, there was a brief variance because the new parcel orientation created a smaller setback in the rear than 20, which was required. Then a new garage was approved, this garage, in 1991. This was all before Castellet owned the property. Here is the original entry of that 1263 Emerson. In 1993, Castellet acquired this property and went through some changes here. This is the building today has this porch, which came about in 1998. That was around the time that Dames and Moore did the study of the city potential resources, and so it was around the same time that this remodel happened. This just shows the plans I found. This was the existing condition with that smaller entry and a separation between the building and the garage, and then this is the 1998 changes that connected this building with this building and proposed this new porch that is there today. So here we are at the purview. There's an architectural review application that has been submitted. We have not visited the ARB yet. It won't be for some time because we're in the environmental impact review portion of the review. And then the Planning and Transportation Commission has conducted the EIR hearing, and they have not yet had discussions about the applications on file that are in their purview. So that's all in our staff report about this. So the next step is the applicant is trying to complete the architectural review application and the tentative map application. They have a file that came in August 22nd. That's available online for anyone who wants to see those, the map and the plans. And then we're projecting to move ahead with public hearings coming up this fall and winter. So this is the slide that basically shows a CEQA process here that we're in. We had the initial study, the notice of preparation. This was in 2017. We published the draft EIR July 17th of this year, and a final EIR would come out with responses to comments. So I'm going to turn it over to our consultant.
Good morning. As Amy said, my name is Catherine Waugh. I'm a senior project manager with DUDEC, and with me today is Katie Haley. She's our architectural historian. I'm going to do the presentation myself just to kind of keep it a little bit more efficient, but both of us are more than happy to answer questions. So just a quick overview of my presentation. It kind of mirrors the format that Amy just went through, but a slightly different focus, just to kind of give you a good overview of the EIR content so that you have a good understanding of the project overall. So this slide just lists the various entitlements that are requested with the project, again, to provide you with the context of what the project involves. So as Amy mentioned, it's the project, the school operates under a conditional use permit, and so that's really the main focus is amending the conditional use permit to allow the requested increase in enrollment and the building modifications and demolition and new construction that's proposed. And one of the key elements of the project is to construct the underground parking garage, which would be in the location where the two residential structures are currently located. And then that allows for placing that park type setting at the ground surface where those houses currently are. As Amy mentioned, the historic resources that are within the project site on the campus, the administration and chapel building, are not proposed to be modified other than that exterior finishes and exterior staircase. Another key feature of the project is to remove the current swimming pool and reconstruct a swimming pool below grade along the Emerson frontage. And then to construct a classroom or academic building, I think it's labeled on the slide, that would include library and classroom facilities and other spaces that are necessary for the school's educational programs. And then this slide gives an overview of some of the landscaping treatment. The different colors are just sort of different zones of landscaping that are proposed. And so there's a different sort of palette of plants that are proposed in each one, and there's more details in the site plans. This slide shows some of the building elevations for the proposed new construction. So again, the library is the portion that would be closest to the administration building. But as the slides that Amy presented show, there'd be a much greater kind of setback between the two buildings than currently exists. And then this slide, the bottom image there shows that the exterior staircase, that would be added, or is proposed to be added to the administration building. So then just a quick overview on the California Environmental Quality Act and what the city's obligations are under that legislation, regulation. So this is the quick overview of the process. As Amy mentioned, we had an initial study and a notice of preparation that was circulated in 2017, and that was sort of our first formal description of the proposed project and how we would be approaching the environmental impact analysis. And so all of the comments that were received at that time were reviewed and reflected in how we prepared the actual draft EIR. The draft EIR CEQA requires a minimum 45-day public review period. For this project, the city determined to provide a 60-day public review period, which ends this coming Monday, the 16th. And then once we have all of the comments, we will provide responses to those comments. Where necessary, we can make amendments or revisions to the text of the draft EIR to help provide clarification and maybe some refinements to the discussion and mitigation measures. And then that becomes the final EIR, which is what the City Council ultimately would determine whether or not to certify, and that would indicate that the City Council believes that it's been prepared in accordance with the requirements of CEQA. The draft EIR is required to include a detailed project description. So we have a long chapter explaining all of the elements that are proposed within the project and supported by figures to really demonstrate to the public what's proposed there. We define what the existing conditions are of the project area, specific to each of the resource topics that we're evaluating impacts for. And then determine whether the proposed changes that the project would bring about would have a significant impact on that existing condition. We also look at mitigation measures and project alternatives that can help us avoid or reduce any of those significant impacts. And then consider some of the other CEQA issues, such as growth inducement, cumulative impacts, and those to give the city a full idea of the environmental effects of the project as a whole. So these next few slides just run quickly through the impacts and mitigation measures that we found in each of the resource areas, because I know that the Historic Resources Board is focused on historic resources, and you don't really want to get into all the details. I wanted to just keep this as a really quick overview for you. We did find a few significant and unavoidable impacts, and these are primarily related to the way that traffic patterns would change by the proposal to create an underground parking garage and really concentrate all of the pickup and drop-off activity in that garage. But that is an important consideration under CEQA, is that if you find a significant and unavoidable impact, to make sure that that is well documented and disclosed. And that would require, if the City Council ultimately wants to approve the project and certify the EIR, they would need to adopt what's called a statement of overriding considerations that explains what trade-offs the city feels warrant accepting a project that has significant and unavoidable impacts. Those significant and unavoidable impacts, as I said, are related mostly to this traffic patterns, and so they really don't affect the historic resources issues, but I wanted to make sure that you all were aware of those. So one of those was under land use in terms of compatibility of the project with the neighborhood, but again, that discussion really focuses on the traffic issues. For all of the other impacts, such as aesthetics and noise, we found that the project would be compatible with the neighborhood. It was really the change in traffic patterns that caused that to be a significant unavoidable impact. With respect to cultural resources, which is the last row on this table, on this slide, we found that the impacts would be less than significant. The project would not adversely affect the historic significance of the gun administration building and the chapel building, and would not affect the historical significance of the neighboring property, as Amy discussed. Transportation, as I mentioned, is where we did find some key impacts, and so there's some mitigation measures identified. The project proposes to increase their transportation demand management efforts to help reduce the amount of traffic that may be brought, new traffic that may come to the campus. We also looked at the typical things of noise, air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, and where, in several of these impacts, or several of these issues, we found that there could be minor changes in the environment that required mitigation, and the mitigation measures that we've identified are very typical, standard types of measures that are applied to most projects throughout the state. So there's not really a unique consideration, for this project compared to other projects of similar types. So similarly, this slide goes over some of the other topics of geology, biology, and there was one other one on there. Oh, energy conservation. And that we did find that this project would actually have a good benefit in terms of energy conservation by replacing older buildings with newer, more energy efficient structures, and would incorporate solar photovoltaic panels on the roofs. Finally, hazardous materials is something that we evaluated in the initial study and notice of preparation. Again, found that it's a very common thing that you'll find asbestos and lead-based paints and lead-containing materials in buildings of this age. So again, it's very standard, typical mitigation measures that we identified to make sure that those don't cause adverse health effects in the neighborhood. And then, as I mentioned, CEQA requires that you look at project alternatives to try and avoid and reduce impacts. And so this slide summarizes the 3 alternatives that we looked at. The no project alternative is something that's required by CEQA. So that's where you just imagine the situation where the project has no change, it doesn't go ahead, and so the property stays the way that it is currently. We also looked at reducing enrollment to 506 students compared to the 540 that's proposed. And we found that would, slightly reduce the need, the building sizes and allow for some minor modifications to the site plan. And then the second alternative, or the third alternative was the same student cap, but we also played with the parking. The project proposes more parking than is required under the city's codes. And so we looked at reducing that sort of excess parking to see whether that could reduce any of the project's significant and unavoidable impacts. And we really found that all of these alternatives would result in similar impacts as the proposed project. There may be slight changes up and down, but nothing that would avoid any of the significant and unavoidable project impacts. The draft EIR has been out for almost 60 days now, and so we have received a large volume of comments, and this slide just summarizes the main topics that we've been seeing repeated in those comments. So there's a lot of comments about the land use intensity and density in terms of how, is this proposed campus and proposed student enrollment appropriate for the size of the campus. Obviously concerns about traffic and noise and aesthetics. And then with respect to historic resources, I know you guys have had a chance to review some of the comments, and so there has been concern from the neighbors about the historic significance of the Lockheed House, and as Amy pointed out, that was determined in our analysis not to be eligible for either local or state or national registers due to the extent of changes that have happened to that building over time. And then more recently, there was a comment letter that related to consideration of whether the neighborhood around the school should be considered as a historic district. And that is something that, the proposed project doesn't affect anything outside of its boundaries, and so that's not something that we typically would look at in a CEQA analysis, but we're certainly happy to answer questions on that one as well. I think the other comments are pretty typical of the concerns that we would hear from community members on projects. So again, I just wanted to provide that context for you guys. And so just to wrap up what the CEQA process requires, as I mentioned, the public review period for this EIR ends on Monday, which means that all comments should be submitted to the city by the end of business on that day. And folks are aware of the email address that can be used to submit comments, and they can also be submitted by standard U.S. mail or even hand delivered for that personal touch. So just the contact information is here on this slide for anyone who needs that information. And that was the conclusion of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Catherine. I wanted to remind everyone today, before we move on to the next phase, that the purpose of our meeting today, as articulated in our staff-prepared materials is to provide members of the community with another opportunity to comment on the draft EIR, and in particular to allow the Historic Resources Board to discuss and focus primarily on historic resources evaluation. And there are attachments in the materials at the back in C and A that list the issues we want to address today. What we don't want to address, and we don't have the purview of addressing, are the land use issues, the parking issues, traffic. That's really not our scope of review. It's a legitimate issue for the community, but it's not our focus. And so I'd like to keep our comments to the historic resource issues that we address as a board. So, Amy, you have any other questions before we open up to public comment?
I don't. I mean, if anyone has questions for staff or our consultants, maybe hold them till after the public comments, if that works.
Yeah, I think that
Okay.
was my intent, so write them down. Oh. Actually, there are some housekeeping issues. So Brendan, you start.
Housekeeping?
Disclosures.
Oh, sure. I wanted to disclose that I own property within 500 feet of Castellet. I don't reside there, but.
Yeah, I don't know if that would disqualify Brendan.
I know, since it's a public hearing.
Martin?
Yes, thank you, Chair Brower. I'd like to just disclose, I met with earlier this week Kathy Leyendecker. She's the associate head of school. So I just went to the property just to take a look at the historic structures there. And she was kind enough to give me a tour of the properties. So, good.
And I need to disclose that in late 1990s, I worked on 1263 Emerson, the Loki House, and that I also built a house at 1310 Emerson in 1998. I'm no longer in business, so I don't think that presents a conflict, but just wanted to make sure everyone understood that I have some experience with the site and the buildings. Also, I've lived here for 68 years and understand the significance of Castellet in the community. Anyone else want to make any comments? Okay, so we will circle back to comments or questions for staff. Let's start with Adam Woltag. He is speaking for more than 5 people, and so because he's aggregated the comments of other people, he has 15 minutes allotted time. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Adam Woltag. I'm a design partner with WRNS Studio, and we're the architects for the new Castellet campus. So I have hopefully a brief presentation that I would really appreciate the board's comments on the architectural resource on the gun building. The new campus presents a really great opportunity for the east facade of that building, so we'd love to get some of your input. So the first slide we have up here shows the existing condition, and in that dashed box, what's really important to note is that actually the chapel building, the administration building, and the classroom building are all co-joined together into kind of one large building. The proposed design actually looks at demolishing the Rhodes classroom building and building a new classroom building about 50 feet away from the east facade of the gun building. That presents a really tremendous opportunity for a new pedestrian gateway and entry into campus, and it frees up or liberates that eastern facade of the gun building. So these are some of the photographs of the existing conditions today of both the chapel building and the administration building. Great examples of craftsman architecture. They're beautiful buildings. Primarily, the materials that are primarily used are cedar shingles, expressed roof details, a pebble flash stucco finish on the lower story of the gun building, and kind of a mix of symmetrical and asymmetrical kind of window treatments along it. But really beautiful architectural kind of expression. On the left, you see an aerial view of the existing campus, and again, just focusing on the fact that the Rhodes building really abuts the eastern facade of the administration building. On the right is the proposed design. of the campus. And what you really, I think, need to kind of focus on is the fact that that new building is 50 feet away from the facade of the Gunn building. The architectural character along that Bryant Street facade, too, is also important to note. And the new architectural character is really influenced by the character of the existing architectural resources. So some of the key findings that were pulled from the draft EIR we wanted to kind of bring out today. First and foremost, the Gunn and the Hughes Chapel building are listed on Palo Alto's historic inventory as Category 3 contributing buildings. All the campus buildings were evaluated that were over 45 years old for potential historic significance, and no additional properties were found eligible for the California Register of the Palo Alto inventory. Even though the campus relatively holds to its initial kind of structure, it still lacks enough integrity to constitute as a historic district. And then finally, I think it's 1235 and 1263 Emerson Street residences were not found eligible for listing as historic resources on the local inventory or on the California Register. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of the history of the Gunn building and the Hughes Chapel building and how they kind of got married together over time. In 1910, as you see here in blue, that was really the original configuration of the Gunn building. Its entrance initially faced Bryant Street, as you see there. There's also a historic photo on the lower right-hand corner of the slide where you can kind of see that eastern facade as it was originally designed. Key to point out there is a gateway that runs along Bryant Street and reaches towards the other, I think it was a dormitory building at that time. In 1926, the Hughes Chapel was constructed as a separate independent standalone building with its entrance facing Bryant Street. They did not touch at that time. They functioned independently from one another, similar in architectural details, but obviously not the same. In 1967, Rhodes Hall was built, completely different architectural style, cast-in-place concrete building. It went all the way up to that eastern facade, did not necessarily connect to the Gunn building, but it did come up and really just touch that facade. Again, the chapel building and the administration building were still separate independent structures. The most significant improvements and adjustments to the project came in 2000. When both the administration building and the chapel building were significantly remodeled on the interior. Basements were added to each one of those buildings, and the entries were reorganized into kind of a conjoined kind of lobby space you see there that really connected those two buildings together and to function as one building. And then Hughes Hall was actually connected and provided a required exit from the Gunn building through Hughes Hall and out to the exterior. The proposed design actually now demolishes the Rhodes Hall and creates a new pedestrian entry facing Bryant Street that leads directly into the circle, the center of campus. It opens up an opportunity there to provide a required exit from the Gunn building and an opportunity for a new campus gateway. These are the elevations of the Gunn and Rhodes, the Gunn and the chapel building. The two bottom elevations are of most significance here. You can see the proposed kind of revised eastern elevation of the administration building, and across from it, 50 feet away, the proposed elevation of the academic building, the library building that would be facing that elevation. Key to note are the architectural materials that the new campus building will be using, inspired by the wood shingles of the historic resources. That library building will be using the same type of cedar shingles, cast-in-place concrete, and metal details and highlights throughout the rest of the campus. So looking at that Bryant Street elevation, it is a design intent here to continue the same architectural gateway that you see along the Embarcadero, all the way along Emerson to basically connect the library building to the Gunn administration building there. The same brickwork, same metal detailing, and concrete caps. As we scoot around to face that freed up elevation, that eastern elevation of the Gunn building, you're starting to see the required exit stair that we're proposing in option 1. The intent of this design option is to provide a complementary but contrasting design approach. The stair is going to obviously be designed to not kind of confuse any historic reference to the building. We think it's simple, we think it's elegant, we think it's quiet, and it provides the most minimal, we think, structural and architectural impact to that eastern facade of the gun building. It's going to be interesting to see what is going to be revealed after Rhodes Hall is removed, but the idea is to continue the same architectural language along that eastern facade, the incorporation of cedar shingles, the pebble flash stucco treatment, the same color of paint, all of that to just carry that same architectural character around that eastern facade. These are some views that illustrate how that stair would be incorporated to that facade. Key to note here is that stair would be landing basically on the edge of a planter. They would pick up again on some of that brick detailing that would carry in from the gateway along Bryant Street into campus. Here's another view, a little bit of an area view that shows how that would all come together along that facade. Option 2 looks at something that is a little bit more robust, and one might say starts to blur a little bit more the lines of what is new and what is historic. The architectural cues here for that exit stair start to pick up on some of the architectural detailing of the Hughes Chapel. A little bit thicker posts, thicker rails, and a bit more engagement on that eastern facade of the gun building. Larger, fenestrations, a little bit more impact to the building. We think it's appropriate, but it does have a much more significant impact to that facade. Here again, you start to see from the interior of campus looking out towards Bryant, and then again from Bryant Street looking back into campus and seeing the impact of that stair. So really, the summary slide here just starts to outline the differences between each one of those design options. The first one is really a lighter, we think a little bit more complementary but contrasting design approach to the existing architectural resource. A little bit less impact to that facade, but again, carrying on the same architectural language, we think, and picking up on those same details. Option 2, much more robust, and we think maybe blurs a line. Maybe we went a little bit too far along that blurring, but we think it's something we wanted to look in contrast and get some of your opinions on. I'm able to take questions here, or can sit down and wait. Yes?
Thank you, Chair Bauer, and thank you for your presentation. Your name again, please?
Adam Woltag.
Adam, thanks. Let's see, did you show a slide of the existing gun building before there was an attachment? Let's go back to that photo of, I think there was a historic photo, I think.
Yeah.
Of the eastern view. There was a sketch, I think, that, or some.
There was a historic photo, yes.
Yeah,
There it is.
you go, yeah. Have you considered because the HRB has approved previous projects where as long as there's some photo documentation of what was there existing, to actually go back to restorative to make it look like that photograph? Have you considered that?
We did look at that.
Okay.
I think what we can start to discern from this elevation compared to what we're being proposed, it looks like there may be some windows along that facade that we would definitely consider, looking at putting back into the building. It does, though, start to provide it does start to provide more impact to that facade, and we wanted to put forth to this group if that's something that would be beneficial or not to the architectural resource.
Yeah. So that could be something the board, Chair Bauer, that could be something that the board looks at is actually, since there's photo documentation of what that east facade looked like, that's something the board then we can discuss if that could be our recommendation.
I think when the project comes back in the next phase, aren't we going to review the actual architectural
Well,
detailing?
this is, we're cutting into the presentation here, so we should adjust that accordingly. The Palo Alto Municipal Code does not have Category 3s and 4s coming to the board if they're outside of downtown or National Register District. So technically, it does not have to come back to this board as the architectural review application. The ARB could refer this to the HRB for comments. So, I think you could provide comments today that would be captured in minutes. You could request a session to talk in more detail, since we're just seeing these today. We can do that.
Okay, since we don't have any action today, we're just doing the review, why don't we consider your comments or any board member's comments as part of the record, and then we can review the comments later and then decide whether we want to request that the ARB send the project back to us. But I think it's perfectly appropriate for board members to comment on these changes to the historic building, so
Yeah.
noted.
Okay. Just a quick comment then, yeah.
Okay.
You said Adam, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So Adam made a reference to option 2 being a little more robust, and I would agree with Adam's comment that it looks a little bit too robust and it starts to just distract from the historical quality. So that's why I looked at the historic thing. So the windows, again, it may interfere with the program of the existing building. Certainly, there have been enough examples throughout history, as you may know, where at least you could put on the window frames on the outside. Again, just historical reference. And I think that can then respond to your comment about maybe option 2 is too robust. And I mean, we have some good historical records here and for the historical quality. So to maintain that Category 3 building, yeah.
Great, we can definitely look into that. Yes, thank you.
My other question, general question, is will the HRB minutes be part of the comments that are incorporated into the draft environmental review period?
Yes, they
Great,
will.
thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I'd like to follow up on Martin's observation and let other board members express their questions. In the two options you provide, what's striking to me is, excuse me, option 1, I think, has a minimal impact on the building. And since we consistently see before this board changes to buildings and have to evaluate impact, even though all of them could be undone, I think minimal changes that keep the existing building or return the building, in this case, to its more closer to its original form is desirable, rather than a more robust, as you describe it, statement that clearly differentiates it, but then once again has a greater impact. So my feeling is less is better. Okay, anybody else have a comment on this particular presentation? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Andy Reid, followed by Rob Levitsky. And 3 minutes for comments now. So just state your name for the record.
We're letting her present.
Okay, sure. Also, please stay very close to the microphone.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chairman and Historic Board members. I appreciate your hard work today in consideration of this project. My name is Andy Reid, and I live at 160 Melville Avenue. In Chapter 6, Cultural Resources, the DEIR only studies the area of the school property as it exists today and the 2 residential properties that the school proposes to demolish to use those lots for the school, making it a half acre larger than it is currently. DUDEC did not study the surrounding area. A very important element of the National Historic Preservation Act is Section 106, in which the area of potential effects needs to be determined and should take place early in the environmental review process. Further study of the effects is required if the land use changes, which it does from residential to school property. Or does the destruction of the buildings change traffic patterns, which specifically yes, because it is demolishing houses and trees in order to accommodate an underground garage. Here is what I call the short block of Emerson. I've circled with green, and the green surrounding blocks are residential. The red outline is the school property, and the red hash marks in the 2 residential blocks are proposed to be subsumed into school property. This next slide is the same area, but a larger view. All of the yellowed ones have been listed in Priority Studies 1 or 2 or the Cultural Resources book as eligible or potentially eligible for California registry. And the green outlined buildings are all dating from 1900 to 1930. And Professorville is right across the street. These surrounding areas of eclectic older houses that contribute to the character and atmosphere of the block would be substantially degraded by the change of context, replacing houses with an underground garage exit. Also in Chapter 5, Aesthetics, the DEIR states that the Emerson Street frontage would experience a great degree of change in condition because of demolishing houses, including the 100-year-old Lockheed House. But it concludes that these changes would not substantially alter the visual character of the site. Here I'm showing you the two houses that are on the chopping block. And this is the Lockheed House alone, how beautifully it is surrounded by its trees. Who would determine that replacing these residences with an underground garage exit would not affect the visual character? As the city's Historic Review Board, please note the DEIR's erroneous conclusions and note that the garage structure would change a residential block to commercial. Please recommend retaining the residential feel of our neighborhood and leaving this block intact. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Rob Levitsky, followed by Kimberly Wong.
Waiting for his slides to come up.
Sure.
I want to thank Adam for his architectural chatter. But I'm here to talk about another historic resource, which is the trees. Nothing that seems to be unmentioned in the last 15 or 20 minutes. We have, even new builders, several of you are builders, know that Palo Alto has an ordinance protecting oaks and redwoods. And yet none of that shows up in the DEIR. The environmental impact report is supposed to get everything out so that policymakers can make decisions that are appropriate. And yet we have no information about the trees. From the Palo Alto Technical Tree Manual, which you builders would know about, oaks wider than 11.5 inches in diameter, or redwoods 18 inches diameter, are protected by definition in the city of Palo Alto. And there's about, let's see. So here's a picture of the 6 redwood trees, pushing 100 feet in height. Not mentioned in the report, other than to say that they found only less than significant value. So the technical tree manual says you can cut a tree down if it's dead or dying, if it's hazardous, like structural problems with branches, if its roots are interfering with utilities or with a basement, or if you're affecting more than 25% of the buildable area. And none of the protected trees shown on the Castellea property meets those criteria. So it would take an overriding consideration by the City Council to kill any of these trees. Now, Stanford 10 years ago started working on the Med Center, and they had a similar problem with some oaks. And these are the oak trees next to the Stanford Hospital, and there's 9 of them, and they show up in the biological resources section of the EIR, which does not exist on the Castellea DEIR. And what Stanford decided to do was protect these trees and had several options just dealing with the minimum impact on these trees. And they decided to, in fact, not build over this location here, and in fact, make it a special Kaplan lawn is what it's called. And so Stanford chose as their preferred option to protect the trees. Here again are the trees at Castellea, another view here. And then here's another view from Emerson Street, and you'll notice the canopy is about 100 feet high with oaks in front of it, all something that people see as they're walking down the street, and cannot be replaced with some mitigation of 15-foot trees from a box. Beep, beep, beep. Anyway, this DEIR will not stand. It will have to go back for further review because they've eliminated, you can't just ignore local ordinances and murder all these trees. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Kimberly Wong, followed by Neva Yarkin.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Wong of 1260 Emerson Street. Thank you for reviewing the draft EIR Cultural Resources report of Castellea's proposal before the Lockheed House as well as its neighbor is demolished. I feel that the evaluation of the Lockheed House as a historical resource was not sufficient. There were several items in my own research that were overlooked. The Lockheed House was next to 3 homes on the Melville Street that the city gave to Castellea for its playing field in 1993. This was a loss to the fabric of the neighborhood. And now the school is attempting to remove 2 more homes, leaving only 1 out of 6 homes on that small block. And for what? A garage to bring significant and unmitigable traffic and unavoidable impacts to the neighborhood. The report also forgot to mention that in 2010, there was a celebration and dedication of this home to Miss Mary Lockheed and the school's alumni. The fact that this home is associated with persons of significance with our past, founding the longest-lasting non-sectarian girls' school in the U.S. today, should qualify the home for the National Historic Register. Dudek also failed to name an architect or builder for the Lockheed House. Gustav Laumeister, son-in-law of Henry Seal, who sold Miss Lockheed the plot of land, was hired to develop the campus for her. The possibility that this famed Professorville developer could have also built the Lockheed House was not studied and should be. Lastly, Dudek's historian on page 16 reports that the Lockheed House, that still hosts guests and events, no longer retains the integrity of the original design, just because of a few additions. Please take a look at the photos and determine whether or not it retains the characteristics of the turn of the century home. I think it still looks very lovely. I request that there be a full historical evaluation of the Lockheed House to determine the architect or builder, the year that it was built, because I found a lot of discrepancies, and subsequent building permits to evaluate the significance of these alterations, and whether the fabric of the neighborhood would be irreplaceably and significantly changed with its loss forever. I would prefer that Castellea keep the Lockheed home to house guests and intimate get-togethers as they do now. They could also convert part of the home to a museum to showcase Castellea's and Miss Lockheed's and her alumni's contributions to Palo Alto's rich history for future generations to enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Neva Yarkin, followed by Peggy McGee.
My name is Neva Yarkin, and I live at 133 Churchill Avenue, around the corner from Castellea. If Castellea gets their expansion for another 125 new students, this whole area will be changing. Over 70% of the students come from outside of Palo Alto. How is this expansion helping Palo Alto residents? Rebuilding classrooms, changing the pool, the redwood trees would disappear, 2 houses will be destroyed, and an underground commercial parking garage will be built. All this will change the landscape and structure of the 6-acre site, and also the historic character of the neighborhood. The Bryant Bike Boulevard will be destroyed in the process. How can you have many cars entering from Embarcadero, the new underground commercial parking garage on the same street as bike riders? There will be accidents waiting to happen, and all for a modest amount of new parking spaces for the garage. Besides massive construction for years to come, 125 new students will add to our traffic problems we already have now. How will Castellea expansion really be beneficial to all the citizens of Palo Alto? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Peggy McGee, followed by Heather Allen Pang.
Hello, is this work? Good morning.
Could you state your name into
I
the...
was going to say good morning first.
Okay,
Okay.
fair point.
Okay. My name is Peggy McKee. I live on Cowper Street between Seal and Santa Rita. It is my pleasure to speak to the HRB on behalf of Castellea, its place in the Palo Alto community, and in Palo Alto's history. I have lived in Palo Alto for more than 50 years, and like many others, I cherish the way it has enriched my life and the lives of my family and friends. We settled here in the 1960s, sent our children to Walter Hayes Jordan, as it then was, and Pali. I taught history at Castellea for 45 years and helped to develop curriculum that would ensure a state-of-the-art, cutting-edge education for young women of Palo Alto and its environs. My granddaughter graduated in 2016. The mission and goal of the school to educate young women to reach their fullest potential have never changed. It remains the only non-sectarian, all-girls high school in the Bay Area. Indeed, Castellea, at the lofty age of 112 years, is almost as old as Palo Alto itself. As a Palo Alto resident interested in my community, I served on the board of the Palo Alto Historical Association, currently co-edit its newsletter, and help to arrange and publicize programs that highlight Palo Alto's unique history. I was an early member of the Palo Alto History Museum Board and am presently an archivist at the Women's Club. I enjoy taking visiting friends on walks through Old Palo Alto, the Jobs House, Professorville, the Garage, and Crescent Park, the Zuckerberg compound, pointing out who has lived where and what used to be there. Palo Alto is near and dear to my heart, and I consider it one of Palo Alto's crown jewels. Like many of you, I have watched the architectural evolution of Palo Alto as small houses, which I remember with some fondness, are replaced by large new constructions, some in jarring juxtaposition to their neighbors. These, of course, accurately reflect the prosperity, wealth, and status of many residents, but they have also changed the ambiance of the old neighborhood. Oh, that means I have to stop, right? Castellea has respected the conception of its own buildings and the integrity of the neighborhood in which it has made its home for more than a century. It would border on tragedy, in my opinion, to shatter those links. Thank you.
Thank you. Heather Allen Pang, followed by Alan Cooper.
My name is Heather Allen Pang. Good morning. It is a pleasure to speak to the Historic Resources Board this morning. I grew up in Palo Alto on the 300 block of Melville, and I walked across Embarcadero with no traffic light to attend Castellea. I have been teaching history at Castellea for 20 years now. I am the school archivist and the co-author of Castellea's history book celebrating a century, and I'm proud that I work for a school that does care about its own history. I also have a PhD in American history from UC Davis, and I'm a member of the Palo Alto Historical Association board at the moment. Castellea has been in Palo Alto at its current location longer than most institutions have been in Palo Alto. The school was founded with the support and encouragement of people from Palo Alto and Stanford, and the location has been central to the traditions, ideas, and goals of the school. It has been and continues to be an ideal place to educate young women in the heart of a city that has always valued education. In this plan for modernization, Castellea has been careful to stay true to the history of the school and the neighborhood. The school cares about its history, preserving the Burge Clark Chapel, the Circle, and the Administration Building. Many of the school's longstanding traditions, for example, our opening ceremony on the Circle, our senior speeches, creative and entertaining arts programs, and baccalaureate in the historic chapel, chapel take place in these historic buildings. These spaces are not being impacted by the proposed project other than the re-exposing of the side of the gun building to be as it was before the current classroom buildings were built. We want to make the new buildings fit into the historic character of the neighborhood and continue to teach and learn around the circle, the literal and metaphorical heart of the school. The circle is critical to the school's program in that it provides an open space for community support, sport, and learning. The new building designs honor the materials and character of the neighborhood in a more respectful way than the existing buildings do, while they vault us into the 21st century in both supporting educational needs and environmental sustainability. This project incorporates tenets that are valued by Palo Alto, the care the school is taking to build to the highest environmental standards, serving as a leader in Palo Alto, a city that is leading the way in the fight against climate change, the way Castellea works to educate girls, which honors both the history of the school and the history of Palo Alto, and the attention to the architectural feeling of the city and the neighborhood. As one of the few institutions that has been here in the city for more than 110 years, we're proud to continue to work towards things that have historically been important in Palo Alto: education, leadership, and the environment. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Alan Cooper, followed by Kathy. I'm not sure if I can.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Alan Cooper. I live at 270 Kellogg Avenue, directly across the street from Castellea. I live in a house that was built in 1909, 1 year before Castellea was built at that site. I would like to address the issue of damage to historic buildings in two ways. I feel that we live in a historic district in the area with the surrounding streets. With all, you've heard and seen a map of all the historic homes. These are potential Category 3 homes. My home is a potential Category 3 home. I worry that the DER has not addressed the issue of neighborhood historic homes and the potential damage to those homes through environmental impacts of dust, vibration, chemicals during the construction of the Castellea site. On a secondary thought, I'm concerned about the potential damage to the historic buildings at Castellea, the administration building, and also to the property on Emerson due to liquefaction. The geologic report that was done for the DEIR is in error, as was also pointed out by the review of that report, but nothing has been done. And the main problem is that the liquefaction does not appear to be a bad issue unless that's without a garage. But if you take away the overburden for the garage, it then does become a potential issue. And this was pointed out, but has not. What is needed is more information. So that there is a potential for damage to those buildings in a case in which the environment conditions were such that you could have liquefaction and a large earthquake. So those, a collapse of garage would induce that problem. I think that my own personal feeling is that more needs to be done by the DER in addressing the historical issues to the neighborhood and to these buildings on Castellea property and adjacent to it. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. One moment. Amy, do you want to make an announcement?
Yes. Earlier, Commissioner Vice Chair Corey had mentioned that he owns property, does not live within 500 feet, but owns property. And, we weren't aware of that before. So, my understanding is Board Member Corey was thinking this was a study session and was not a place where comments were at issue. I think I've consulted with our city attorney. She has confirmed that he is conflicted, and therefore it's best to recuse for any matter pertaining to Castellea, including today's meeting. So I would suggest departure.
That's the hook out of the building.
So I'm sorry, the city's interpretation of this is that if you're conflicted, you can't be in the room because the mere presence of a conflicted individual that's on a board could have an impact on other board members, even though we're not coming to any conclusions today in honor of the city's requirements. Corey has to leave. So I'll take over timing.
You can do it. You can do it, Salsa.
All right, thank you. Sorry for the interruption. Kathy, and I apologize for not being able to pronounce your last name. I can't read it. So help me with that.
It's Leyendecker. I have actually a request to make. There's somebody who would like to speak today. Her card is in, but she can't stay the whole time. Could I swap my time and speak later when she was?
Sure. What's
It's Catherine Garber, and I'll go in wherever Catherine is in that stack. Thank you.
Well, similar name, so that works. Good morning, Chair Bauer and Historic Resource Boards. Catherine Garber. I'm a principal at Fergus Garber Young Architects and have been practicing architecture in Palo Alto since the mid-90s. I live right next to Green Middle School, and my children, both boys, attended Palo Alto schools. My strongest relationship with Castellea is that I ride my bicycle by it on my way to work in town and country every day. In my 20-plus years of practice as an architect here in Palo Alto, I've done quite a few extensive remodels and additions of historic homes within several blocks of Castellea, 2 each on Ramona, Bryant, and Kingsley, 2 on Cowper, and 9 on Coolridge. And I've designed a number of new homes in the neighborhood, 1 each on Kellogg, Emerson and Waverly, and 2 on Cowper. The city staff and review board members have repeatedly stated that our designs have been compatible with the neighborhood. It's something I take great pride in. I love Professorville and Old Palo Alto and have enjoyed being part of its preservation and its evolution into what I think is one of the most interesting neighborhoods I've been anywhere in the country. As with other interested community members and as a curious architect, I've taken a look at Castellea's proposal. I like its overall design. I was pleased to see that the historic gun building will retain its look and again have its eastern facade exposed. And I think the new construction is compatible. The new buildings are very quiet and the materials nicely complement the historic building. It's reassuring that the scale and the massing will not be much different from today, so the neighborhood should feel similar. I also wanted to comment on the handsome gates and fencing that the landscape architect is proposing. They're more interesting and better detailed than you see on most commercial buildings. And I think it will blend in nicely with the neighborhood. I was also impressed with the selection of their plants and trees. I think the landscaping looks dense and is well crafted, as is found on most residential projects in the neighborhood. Lastly, I wanted to add my 2 cents on removing the 2 houses on Emerson and replacing them with a park. I ride my bike by them almost every day, and both of these properties present themselves with a single 18 or 20-foot wide garage door. That's what you see from the streets. It's not that appealing. I'd much rather ride by a park. Thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts on the project.
Great, thank you. Dan Chapman, followed by Mindy Romanowski. You're last. Oh, okay. Fine. Please, Kathy. Yeah. So Dan is not coming up?
Dan is here, but he is seated. It's time for me to...
Okay, so Dan, you become Kathy.
Okay, all right.
All right.
Good morning, Chair Bauer and Historic Resources Board members. I'm Kathy Landecker, as you've heard, Associate Head of School at Castellea, and in that capacity, I'm responsible for overseeing the CUP application process. Thank you for this opportunity to share details about Castellea's new master plan that seeks to modernize our learning spaces while honoring the school's historic significance in Palo Alto. As you've already heard, Castellea has been part of the educational fabric of Palo Alto since 1907 and at its current location since 1910. As such, we have celebrated our historical significance to Palo Alto through a thoughtful planning process that considers both our traditions and the 21st century needs of our students and our campus. The buildings we hope to replace have served Castellea well for almost 60 years, and we want to create new spaces that will last even longer. With such a rich history at this location, we have worked hard to preserve the historic buildings, the Chapel Theater and the Gun Administration Building, and the many other enduring traditions, such as the circle at the heart of our campus and the robust canopy our many trees provide. At the same time, we want to embrace the future with flexible spaces that will support 21st century learning, sustainable systems and operations that minimize our impact on the environment, and improvements to our design that will allow us to blend more gently into the neighborhood aesthetic while minimizing our impact on the neighborhood. As a city, Palo Alto strikes a balance between revered traditions and important innovations. Castellea is seeking to do the same. We are pleased that the draft environmental impact report found our project to be 100% compliant with the city's comprehensive plan. Palo Alto and Castellea have a long history. They were young together and have grown into robust and interconnected communities over the last century. It is gratifying, though not at all surprising, to see that the city and the school's goals and values are so closely aligned. It is also gratifying to realize that the DEIR found no significant impacts in either its aesthetic or cultural resources reviews. We have created a clear and concise proposal that protects the historic elements of our campus throughout the project. The final details of our preservation plan will be prepared by a historic preservation specialist. And through every phase of construction, personnel will receive specific cultural resource awareness training. The DEIR notes and supports all of the measures we have created and choices we have made to protect the historic, cultural, and architectural resources on our site. As Castellea, we are steeped in tradition as a community. Our students are joined through generations of shared experience on this campus. Can I take dance time too? Okay, thanks. And our students, employees, alumni, and families all value our rich history, value our neighborhood, and value Palo Alto. The project keeps those values at its core. The DEIR found that our new spaces better suit our R1 neighborhood aesthetic than our current buildings, incorporating elements that improve the architectural, cultural, and aesthetic relationship between the buildings on our campus and the houses in our neighborhood. We look forward to this next phase in Castellea and Palo Alto's shared history, and we welcome feedback from the Historic Resources Board as a valuable step in the process. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mindy Romanowski, followed by Assam Killing Tremor. Pardon me for mispronouncing names.
Good morning. My name is Mindy Romanowski. I'm a partner with the law firm of Jorgensen, Siegel, McLaren, Flagel in Menlo Park, and I'm the land use attorney representing Castellea in this project. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning about the cultural resources related to Castellea's proposed master plan project in this application. Before we embarked on the design of the master plan, it was path critical to understand the historic constraints. So for that reason, we hired the historic architecture firm of Traynor HL, formerly known as Carey & Co., to educate our team on the historic significance of all of our structures and features on campus. Based on that analysis, we embarked on the thoughtfully designed master plan that you have before you today, and that was studied in the draft DIR, all with respect to the integrity of the historic structures and features on campus. And as a result, when the draft DIR was published, we were very pleased that the cultural resources section of the draft DIR found no significant and unavoidable impacts. Castellea is deeply interested in ensuring that this EIR evaluates all the CEQA impacts so that it's a legally defensible document. To that end, this morning, I would like to highlight a few minor items that need to be clarified in the final EIR that are related to cultural resources. They've already been touched on, but they include the fact that there was a minor oversight in the cultural resources section indicating that the gun administration building would not be impacted, and as you've heard this morning, it will be slightly impacted to be re-exposing the east facade of the building, and you've seen some of the options that have been considered. In any event, we intend to fully comply with the mitigation measures already discussed at 6A and 6B in the draft EIR to respect the features of the gun administration building throughout construction and into the future. Finally, the question's been raised about the historic integrity of 1263 Emerson, the Lockey House. I think it's of interest that the house was named after our dear founder, Mary Lockey, but Miss Lockey never did live in the home. And just because a building is named in the memory of someone, legally it does not make it historic. That is not the legal standard. We do have the utmost of respect for our founder, and that's why we gave it the name. We will likely name other things in her honor in the future. Finally, as you will hear from our historic consultant, there has been follow-up research about the Lockey House, and it is of no legal historic significance, and we will be submitting detailed comment letters to that end. Thank you very much for your time and your service.
Thank you. Eslam Killing, and followed by Priya Graves.
Hello, my name is Ayşem Kılınç. I am an architectural historian at Trainer HL, and known as Kiri & Company. We are an architecture firm in San Francisco specializing in historic preservation. We looked at the 1263 Emerson Street. The cultural resources study by Dudek only addressed the integrity of the house, but did not look at the historic significance under all California Register criteria. So we performed additional research on the house. We went to the city of Palo Alto. Whoop, that's okay.
That was not for you.
Yeah, that was quick. So we went to the city of Palo Alto, the assessor's office at the county, and Palo Alto Historical Association, and we consulted online resources. And we reviewed the house at 1263 Emerson Street, but did not find it individually significant for listing in the California Register or the local inventory. We also reviewed the project that was prepared by WRNS Studio on the administration building. And in general, we find that the removal of the connection between two buildings and the addition of new doors and stairs will be in compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards. The project will not adversely affect the character-defining features of the administration building. Thank you.
Thank you. Apologize for the poor performance on the timer. All right, Priya Graves, followed by Pita Vuru. I'm sorry again.
Good morning. My name is Priya Graves. I live in College Terrace, not near this, but I do bicycle by it all the time. And I have already expressed my concerns about the impact on the bicycle boulevard, both of construction and the long-term effect of cars trying to get into the underground garage. This morning, though, I want to keep my comments brief and simply reiterate the concerns about the isolation that is being imposed on the lovely little house at the corner of Emerson and Embarcadero, as well as the impact on the rest of the folks on Emerson, losing a lot of their cultural context. They're losing the houses across the street, which, while not wonderful, give them a residential context, not a commercial context. And I think that's very dangerous. I would like to see the EIR evaluate more of the surrounding neighborhood and look at what the impact of this change is. Not all of it is bad, but I think that there more evaluation is what's needed. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
I'd like my time not to start until we can put a slide. The guy who's got the slides. You have a thumb? He's already got it. It's part of Rob's discussion, so please don't start my time.
Maybe, is there anyone else that can throw it while I figure all this out?
Does somebody else want to speak?
Dan Chapman is my last card, but I don't know whether you, yeah, okay, so we don't have anybody else.
Bad time to take a break.
Okay, are we good? So I want the slide of the garage. Okay, so my name is Rita Varel. I live over on Channing Avenue, but I am a Castellea parent. My daughter went there for 5 years. I would encourage you, since the entire DEIR was mentioned in this presentation, to review the entire DEIR. And you will find when you do that this DEIR is sloppy, incomplete, and very inaccurate. I reviewed sections on geology, dewatering, and noise. And the report actually tells us that they cannot tell us the amount of noise for construction because they don't actually know what equipment will be used. I find that ridiculous as a parent who read Richard Scarry's construction books to their child. This is basically what will be, the neighbors will be looking at. This is the City Hall garage, but a garage similar to this is proposed for the site of the two houses that are in question regarding historical significance. One of the things that is frequently said is that whoever pays for the report gets the report that they want. I certainly think that this is the situation here. You saw the picture of the Lockheed House with the redwood trees behind it. So now this is what the neighbors are going to get on Emerson Street with a park instead of the City Hall building. This in 4 to 5 years of constant construction. The two houses in question on Emerson are crucial to Castellea's expansion. They're just not two little houses that have garages. If the garages are making them non-historical at this point, take down the garage. But please ask for another historical analysis, because the analysis that is presented in this sloppy DEIR is inaccurate, incomplete, and I think shameful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That completes the public comment section. I'd like to bring the discussion back to the board. In the public comments this morning, there were 4, and I suggest these are general topics that were addressed. One was the change, all changes to the administrative chapel buildings, and in particular, the new stair that's coming on, and how the building, the portion of the administration building that's going to be revealed by the demolition will be handled. In that discussion, or in comments, the compatibility was addressed, massing, size, scale, materials used, architecture and design, and then and how those modifications contrast with the existing building so that they're not misinterpreted as original features. Second is tree protection. Third is the Lockheed House. And then the fourth, there are actually 5. The fourth issue is whether an historic district is a consideration. And finally, whether the DIR, there's a number of questions about the thoroughness and competence of the DEIR. So if we could, I'd like to go back and talk to staff about how the Lockheed House was evaluated. And to start with, I imagine that the Lockheed House could come before the HRB and be presented as a renovation. And if you can imagine that project, what the project designers would argue is that all the changes could be undone and the building could be recovered in its original form. So when I see a report that says the original features have been compromised, I think about how that could be done in reverse. And so I'd like you to address that issue for the community. Is that clear? Is that question clear? So imagine this in reverse. It's a renovation. And the proposal is to take off all of the changes, undo them. And bring it back to where it was. Why wouldn't that? Yeah, so that approach, and the reason I'm asking that question is because your report says the house has been compromised by changes. But we frequently see projects come to the board that ask to have the changes reversed and to renovate the building. And so
I think if you were going to propose doing renovations, I'm sorry. I think if you were going to propose to do renovations to the property that would bring it back to its original appearance, including especially attaching the overall building to the garage and replacing the porch that changed the massing of the building, that maybe you could then, again, after those changes had been implemented, reassess it for significance, because then it would read as the early 1900s home that it was initially constructed as. But as it currently stands, I do substantiate the finding in our technical report that as it currently stands, it doesn't read as it was originally constructed and lacks the historic integrity to convey its significant association as that early 1900s building.
Okay, so as an example of a project we recently reviewed, it's the Palo Alto Sport and Tour World on Waverly. It had been significantly modified in the 70s, took a lot of historic fabric off. They came to the board and they said, we want to restore this building, restore the historic, you can't restore historic fabric, but we want to put it back the way it was because we want a Category 3 designation so they can do other things. We approved that project, they've done that work, and the building now looks remarkably, or when it is completed, it's almost complete, will look remarkably like it did. Then they would come back. My point here is, the report says that building has no significance. But I can foresee a situation where it could recover its significance.
That it could, but that's not we are evaluating its existing condition. And we can't foresee that somebody's going to, it's not part of the project to say that if it was different, if one of the project elements was to look at the Lockheed House and say, an option 2 or 3 of the project was to look at it and say, okay, well, we're thinking about bringing it back. Sure. That's different, but then we'd still need to reassess it after it's been brought back. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Because that's the hard part, is that we're not evaluating somebody's future plan for it, or even speculative future plan. We have to look at it as it currently stands today.
Of course, absolutely. So I am reminded, and the reason I'm being somewhat persistent about in this questioning, in the many seminars I have taken on CEQA application, the one phrase that repeatedly is expressed is there is no mitigation for demolition. So once demolition occurs, it's done. And I'm simply trying to raise the issue that while this project calls for the demolition of that building, because it currently doesn't merit any classification in the city or state or federal registers, it still it could be renovated, it could be recovered, in the future. And once it's demolished, it's gone. That's my point. So thank you for clarifying that. I have another question for you. The idea that there is an historic district that could be created by houses surrounding the project, could you address what would be considered if an historic district were going to be established? What kinds of criteria would be considered? And I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot on this, but just in general, what kinds of things would you consider?
Well, for a local district, you'd want to look at the general character of the area, and you'd want to see, how many contributing buildings, how many non-contributing buildings, and establish a period of significance for the neighborhood. But I think it's important to state that that wasn't addressed in the report because the study area was limited to the school.
I'm not making a comment about.
But it's just, the question's focused on, what you'd have to do.
Right. We received as a board information that suggests that a historic district could be created there. And the purpose of our hearing is to explore that kind of an issue because that might have impact on this project. So obviously, the number of contributing buildings would be important, their age. Those are I think the threshold.
Well, you'd want to establish what the period of significance is for the residential district. And, what's the theme of the residential district? Is it based on architecture, or is there also an event or, significant historical association that it also has tied to? So, I mean, it would be probably an extensive study to figure out what the correct criteria, and maybe it would fall locally, at the local level, it could fall under a few.
Okay, so thank you. The reason I'm asking the question again is this is raised, we can't address it here today, but the significant elements of an historic district would be, as you point out, number of buildings, the area, its significance, the district's significance in Palo Alto's history, maybe the people who lived there, the architects who designed buildings in there, the people who paid for and lived in the buildings. Those are the things that made Professorville an historic district. They created Professorville as an historic district because it was a multitude of factors. And in the information presented to us as a board, there is really just the beginnings of an idea of a district. And I didn't see in that information, and it's not part of your job or description in terms of this project to evaluate that, but I bring up all of this, and I'm being verbose about this because I don't see that has a really likely potential of being an historic district based on what we normally see.
You'd also want to make sure that you understood you have to establish an historic boundary for the district, exactly, or, in addition.
Right, good luck with that. We had a lot of trouble with Professorville establishing a district in this city for years and years and years.
Yeah.
So, okay, I don't want to dominate the discussion. Debbie, you have a question?
I just had a point of clarification. I'm sorry I didn't get your name. You're sitting in the last row in the back there. Yes. So you presented some information about the Lockheed House, a further evaluation that you did to supplement what we received from DUDEC. Who engaged you to do that?
Hello, Aisham Khalid. Castelleja School engaged us to look at the property's historic significance.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I missed that, and that seemed important. Okay,
Martin,
I just want to finish.
What, there's another question for you.
Yes.
Do you have a question?
And I just
Michael?
want to
For the same person?
comment on that because, Annie, when you presented. We have received that information as a board in a letter, but in your presentation today, you didn't reference what we also received, which you just referred to, which is an additional report from an architectural historian named Kostura, which addresses or raises these questions about the Lockheed House and about other historic, potentially contributing buildings in the neighborhood. And it just raises questions, and I feel not enough research has been done. Go ahead.
I just want to add one more thing. We will be submitting a detailed letter to the city that covers all our research and evaluation for the Lockheed House.
Martin, you have a question for
Yeah,
them.
so say Assam is your name? Asham, thanks. So first question, just for process. Is your report in the draft environmental impact report?
No, I wasn't part of it.
So I think it'd be useful, I believe, for the HRB to see your report. So is there a process where we can see your report so we can evaluate what you're reporting?
We will submit a letter to the city by Monday, so you can see it on, I guess, on Monday. I don't know how the process.
Okay, because there might be an opportunity based on what you present in your report that the HRB may have some comments on it. So, okay. So I don't know what the process is of how we can see a report and then comment on it if we think it's comments are appropriate.
Yeah. I think Amy is going to.
Amy?
Yeah. So Amy French. The comments are due on Monday for the draft environmental impact report in its entirety, including the cultural resources and the supplementing documents, the technical documents. The document that the applicant's historic preservation specialist refers to was not a part of the draft EAR. So comments on that are not due on Monday because they're not part of the draft EAR.
Right.
So, certainly any application materials we receive from the applicant, we post to the project webpage, the plans and the like. This is a report. We will be happy to post that to our, our community-facing electronic files. I'm happy to send it to you in the next packet or however by email. I'm happy to do that once received.
All right. Thanks. And then let's see. The HRB received by email a historic commentary from William Kostura. Is that part of the draft environmental impact? Is that included in the draft EIR also?
It is not. It's a comment. Amy French again. It is a comment that on the draft EAR that is considered in preparation of the final environmental. So, the staff and the consultant will be combing through all the comments, and the final EAR addresses the comments. So it's a comment on the draft EAR.
Okay.
If I may
Can you
illuminate.
tell us again who you
Yes, my name is Andy Reed, and I'm with the neighborhood group that surrounds this area. And we asked Mr. Kostouris to take the walk with us around the neighborhood.
Right.
And yes, I agree. It comes close to what may be a historic district, but he says in the report that it's a draft and it's a start at it, and that it wouldn't likely qualify at the high levels of that designation, but rather I'm trying to let you all understand how this neighborhood and its eclectic older houses, how important it is to all of us to retain that character. And our request not to have that impacted. We're not against the school modernizing. Right. We don't want the underground garage, the houses torn down in our neighborhood for the underground garage. Thank you.
Question for Catherine or Katie. When you presented your alternatives, I did not see in the list of project alternatives to retain the two homes on Emerson Street. Would that be appropriate to add as a project alternative?
So CEQA requires that when we look at project alternatives, they are alternatives that can meet most of the basic project objectives while avoiding or substantially reducing one of the project's significant environmental effects. So based on the draft EIR analysis, we didn't find any significant environmental effects that are directly tied to the loss of those 2 houses, and that's why we didn't look at that as a project alternative. However, as we go through all of the comments that have been received and will be received, if that has been raised as a community concern, so that's definitely something that we will do a little bit more work on, or perhaps a lot more work on, to refine the analysis and determine whether or not we need to elevate that concern as to be an environmental impact. But there's a lot of, the CEQA guidelines really direct how we determine whether something is a significant impact or not. And so that it's really tied to that consideration.
Thank you for that. Also, on the DEIR, on packet page 118, you can return to that before I ask my question. When you're ready, I'll ask my question. Packet page 118.
Is there a paragraph?
Okay, under Emerson Street Properties, says the property no longer retains integrity and therefore not qualified to be for historic. So I see these words here. Is there a report, historic report that's in this DRR that supports that conclusion? I didn't see one, but maybe you know if there is such a report.
So that page that you're looking at, that is part of the historic resources evaluation.
Okay.
So the text, that section, so the prior page, there's a heading that says CR/HR Criterion 3.
I see that.
So this is the analysis, and I believe that the history and the documentation of the changes that have occurred to those properties are also presented in that report.
Yeah, and who's the qualified historic person who prepared that report?
So that's the report that was prepared by DUDEC. The primary preparer is Samantha Murray.
Okay.
But she and Katie have worked together and worked on reviewing the materials.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay. All right, and then my last comment in support of Chair Bauer's comment about the reversibility of projects. The HRB has reviewed and approved other projects where, based on enough documentation of what was an original house from the turn of the century, how the HRB has approved renovations that removed and reversed non-historic things to it. So that'd be something that I think the HRB, or at least I'm interested in seeing further information on that aspect for the Lockheed House. Thank you.
So, Michael, Michael,
Yes.
you next, Margaret.
I'd just like to comment on Chair Bauer's thought that about the historic district. I think that does have merit. This school may have had significant influence on the early Palo Alto history, and I think that has not been captured adequately in the consideration of a historic district theme. I think the EIR downplays that, and I think it really should be explored in more detail, the potential to be a historic district.
Can I add to that?
Certainly.
I agree. When you mentioned the word theme, I think the unique relationship historically between the school and the community is something that it's a very delicate balance, but it's a story worth telling, and we should be careful not to lose it.
Yeah, there's some significant early contributors to this school, I think, that are worthy of being recognized as part of a historic district. Of course, the event would be the contribution to the education of the city in its early formative days. all those things should be considered in a historic district report. I don't think they're adequately addressed here.
Okay, Martin has to leave in 8 minutes, and Margaret, you had a comment, then I'd like to bring it back to the chair.
Yes, when we were just discussing the Lockheed House and the fact that the alterations over the years have rendered it potentially no longer historic, were those alterations done by Castellea School? Since they purchased it in 1990, so I believe those alterations were done by Castellea. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
1993 is I'll bring up those slides again that I prepared. 1993, Castellea acquired and modified, changed the address to Emerson. Let's grab that, okay. Back before Castellea acquired it, in the 70s, the garage that was oriented to Melville was removed, so that was maybe the original garage, I don't know, or have been later. The orientation of the lots were changed from Melville to Emerson. The new garage came in 1991, sorry. This is also before Castellea purchased the property. And this looks like the original entry, and that was replaced in 1998 with this modification that added the porch.
Right, but the report says that both residences were acquired by Castellea in the 1990s. It was not specific. It's not.
Yeah, 1993 was the date that Castellea acquired, was the year.
1993. So the alterations that rendered it potentially no longer historic were done prior to Castellea acquiring the property, or did they in fact do those alterations?
I believe Castellea did those alterations in 1998.
So, I mean, isn't that kind of...
Let me interject here. I worked on this house in the 80s, not in the 90s. I did a kitchen remodel on the original house. The garage was there.
Yeah,
this house, my clients exchanged this house for a house across the street at 1310 Emerson, and then they tore that house down and I built them a new one. My understanding is Castellea did the entrance modifications and the connection of the house to the garage, because when I worked there in the 80s, it didn't exist. So I think Castellea, I'm not certain about this, but I think Castellea owned the building when those modifications were made.
So the kitchen, I'm sorry, so you said the kitchen remodel happened in the 80s, so that's before Castellea owned it.
Right, yeah, because I worked for the then owners.
So that's back here, this kitchen area, I guess. Is that the kitchen?
Yeah.
But I think the alteration that most significantly alters it is the connection between the garage and the main house and the addition of the front entry porch, which was done by Castellea, correct?
Mine, yeah.
I believe that, yeah.
So I guess what I'm leading to is now they've done that, now they can say that it renders it potentially no longer historic. I just was bringing up that point.
To be clear, it was not put, when Dames and Moore did the study in 1998 to 2000, this was on the potential list. They went through both those priority lists, 1 and 2, and then 165 ended up being sent to the state as National Register eligible. So it was evaluated for, on some level, as many others were, and then there were only, a couple, over 100 that ended up National Register eligible. We still do have an obligation to evaluate homes for California Register eligible before issuing demolition permits, those that were initially identified as potentially eligible.
And then my second quick question is, it seems to be that there are some themes that the public is bringing up, being sensitive to the neighborhood in general, the trees, some other miscellaneous things. So does the EIR, now it's a draft, but does it take it a step further and address some of those, themes that seem to be coming up in terms of what how the community is reviewing this and what their questions are? Do you address those specifically?
Yes, so the final EIR will have two main parts. One is the responses to comments, and the second is any revisions that we make to the draft EIR. As I said before, CEQA has some really strict guidelines as to what we consider as an environmental effect. And so sometimes the responses to things that are important to the community still don't raise to the level of what CEQA would consider to be an environmental effect. So we certainly address all of that in the responses to comments, because that is, the city needs to consider more than just the environmental review in deliberating upon a project. But CEQA has a fairly well-defined envelope of what is considered an environmental impact and what is more of a community concern. So we do, in the responses to comments, try to make those kinds of issues clear, and then where the comments have touched upon something that is an environmental issue, then we do make modifications to the draft EIR to help clarify or elaborate upon or amplify some of that analysis.
So Martin has to leave shortly. Do you want to make a quick comment? Because I want to do some, before you leave.
Yes, thank you. The issue of the demolition of protected trees, is that listed anywhere in the draft environmental impact report?
Yes, that's evaluated in the land use chapter. There's a table that identifies each tree and what is proposed to happen to that tree, and then what mitigation needs to happen to ensure that the project complies with the city's tree preservation and replacement ordinance.
Great, thanks. So Adam, on your tree page T 2.0, you list, your name's on, your name of your company's on it, but it's BFS Landscape is actually the author of the plan. It does list tree number 112, which is a redwood, to be removed. But on that, maybe you can make a comment to the BFS Landscape Architects. It doesn't show on that plan that it's going to be removed. So that should be corrected. Okay, it's tree number 112. And that's on page T 2.0.
I'm not looking at
Okay.
I'm not looking at the plan. So.
Martin, I want to honor your need to leave. But before
I have one more question, if I may. Yes.
It's better be, okay, then you have to stay until.
Just to clarify, because you're bringing up, plans, we're not really focused on the plans today. I don't have a set in front of me, but we're pretty sure what you're referring to is a tree that was removed several years ago. So because of it was determined to be diseased.
Got it. Okay.
And yeah.
Thank you for that. This is my last comment, and then Chair will take his comment. So I'd like to enter the record to request that the ARB does refer the proposed modifications to the gun structure to the HRB. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so what I would like to do is just briefly poll board members. My sense of our hearing today is that the board, in questions we have asked, have concerns about the gun administration building's modifications, the Loki House evaluation, and an historic district consideration. So I would say, I'm interested in knowing if board members feel that those are areas where the draft EIR is not sufficient, and that whether or not board members feel that they should be addressed more fully, and also to follow up on Martin's suggestion, I do think that the HRB should see the final design considerations for the administration gun buildings as part of our normal oversight. So is that a fair evaluation of our evaluation of this particular DEIR? I'm not going to take a vote. It's just a sense of the board kind of issue. So if there is support for those things, is that, could you just indicate? Yes. Margaret? Yeah, I feel the same?
Yes.
Okay, so.
Yes, I agree.
All right, so in response to the portions of the DEIR that we have purview over, it seems that board would like more information about the 3 items I just mentioned, and that they be addressed in a final draft, and that for Amy and ARB interface, maybe you can communicate with them that we'd like to see this. I would be happy to be there with you to do that.
Sure, and they would receive a copy of the minutes of this meeting as well.
All right, so I think since Martin has to leave, and I think we've covered questions, that would wrap up item number 2 on our agenda. And now we'll go to housekeeping. Maybe we'll take a 5-minute break to allow those people who don't need to be in our housekeeping issues to leave. Thank you all for participating today. This is what makes projects better. I know that it's not always reassuring when you come to meetings like this, but all input is taken seriously, and it does improve the final result. So thank you again for coming. Okay, if we want to get the meeting back on track, we have just housekeeping issues. We just want to do housekeeping here, I think. Trying to get to page 5 of our packet. Our September 26th meeting has been canceled. We will have an October 10th meeting, presumably.
We can, if there's agenda
Okay,
items,
hold on a
which...
second. Hey, guys in the back. Hey.
Oh, excuse me. Oh, thank you. Yeah, but
Okay. Amy, October 10th looks like a real meeting date.
it's well, all meetings are potential meeting dates, kind of like all 50-year-old and older homes are potential historic homes. But if we don't have a meeting item, which, is generated by projects that come in, or a need to have a training session or some kind of thing that somebody has identified that we have time to put together.
In our recent communication, though, you mentioned that there may be a project coming.
Yeah, I was looking at the potential for that, but I don't have an answer at the moment.
All right, so we have the possibility of 5 more, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more meetings. Debbie and I will not be at 2 of those. What's really important is to always tell Vin and our new aide if you are not going to be here, so that we know that we have a quorum.
What about the 26th?
26th of September is canceled. Yeah, Vin sent an email yesterday.
Really only 4 potential meetings because the November 28th meeting, I think, is Thanksgiving. So that's canceled.
Yeah, okay.
Unless you want to bring the turkey.
Yeah, right. No, I don't think the council chambers will be open. All right, and then the last item is approval of minutes. Not the last item, that's the second to the last item. I continue to be frustrated by the transcriptions, but that's probably the result of my inability to be articulate and clear. But anybody have any changes or additions to the minutes for July 25th? Not hearing any, do I have a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes.
Second?
I have to abstain because I wasn't at the meeting.
Oh.
I abstained too, I wasn't there.
I could second it. Why don't we push this forward, continue the consideration when we have our next meeting?
Well, it's not, I mean, because they're pretty much verbatim, I think delaying approving them might be detrimental to the process that they're in with that NVCAP.
You're right. Okay, I'll second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All abstain?
Abstain.
Okay, 2 in favor, 2 abstentions, no denials. All right. Subcommittee items, the subcommittee for the Palo Alto Sport and Toy World building is going to meet after this meeting and conclude what I think is the final issue about the tile. We don't have any other subcommittees currently active. Any board member questions, comments, announcements?
Yes, I have a question. I know that each year we're required to do some educational programs. I don't believe I've done any this year.
Neither have I. Yeah.
That I recall. And it's a calendar year, right?
Well.
Yeah, so there's something coming up, a few things coming up. I can send those out, and gently encourage something. You know, there's so many opportunities, there's webinars and this kind of thing that you can do for, you know, and let us know about them.
They haven't had very many here in the Bay Area when I've been in town, so I haven't gone to any this year either.
No.
But webinars are, they're a possibility.
Yeah, I took the webinar from the California Preservation Foundation on contextual infill.
Oh, yeah.
It was pretty good.
And so anytime you do take some kind of course, you
last
should
month, yeah.
alert me, so then, you know, I have this task every year to prepare this annual report of how's our driving, and that's
Not so good on my part.
Yeah, I'll send you an email. Okay.
All right, good. All right, any other comments, questions? No, not seeing any, then I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.